Hey guys, it's History Behind the Warrior, and welcome to another God of War video. Now, in today's video, shortly coming off our exploration of Odin, as well as his powers, should definitely check out that video before this one, by the way. During the creation of that video, I came across some pretty interesting details that actually went over my head through numerous playthroughs of God of War 2018. I honest to God didn't quite pick up on it till I started going through my archived footage and somewhat pieced together the bits of this puzzle for a much bigger picture. So, in today's video, I will be talking about the Allfather of Asgard, Odin, and how I personally believe that the Mad Raven King is not only responsible for the destruction of Olympus, but he is the one responsible for poisoning its gods. But before we do pass into this chaos, I'd super appreciate it if we could get this video to about 500 likes. You guys have done an absolutely incredible job with supporting the channel recently, so big thank you for me for all of that love that's being shared here. As well, there's tons more God of War content coming your way, with the next History of episode being on Hercules. And if you like what we do here and wish to see more, please don't forget to subscribe and tick that bell. So, without any further ado, let's begin, shall we? Now, to really understand this video and how Odin brought on the downfall of Olympus, let's first actually talk about the Allfather, as it's crucial to understand why he would do such a thing, and most importantly, how is this all possible? How could the Allfather bring on the end of Olympus? Well, let's talk about Odin. Now, for those of you unfamiliar with this iteration of Odin, Odin here is an absolute far cry shadow of the heroic figure we all know in Norse mythology. Here, the Raven King is a mad, tyrannical, arrogant, paranoid god king, seeking out to wipe out all enemies that may lie before him. He does this in the hopes that by doing so, he can rid himself of any that may become an obstacle in his way later down the line in the twilight end of the Aesir gods, Ragnarok. Through this ruthless approach, Odin was able to bring down the giants of Jotunheim, wiping them from the world of Midgard and forcing them back to their home realm of Jotunheim. Upon doing this, he then turned his sights to even his own, incarcerating the likes of Mimir to an unbreakable tree, imprison his son Tyr to a long faraway land, and curse his ex-wife Freya to the dying world of Midgard. Odin was unbelievably ruthless in his elimination of those that stood before him. Friend or foe, no one was safe. And how was he able to do this? Well, with Odin's all-knowing diverse knowledge of elder magic, as he did exist since the dawn of time, Odin's knowledge not only goes far back, but has only grown because of his hunger and desire for knowledge. But how exactly is this tied to the Greek pantheon? Well, bear with me, as I will elaborate on that in a bit, as we must talk about the 2018 installment. During Kratos' and Atreus' quest, where the two are attempting to reach the highest peak in all the 9 realms, this journey at first takes them to the highest top in Midgard. But before they are able to enter, they are halted by a mysterious dark mist known as the Black Breath. This safeguards the mountain and prevents the two from ascending, and it's here where we learn from their ally Freya that the Black Breath is in fact a form of corruption magic, a corruption spell cast out by the Allfather to halt all that may reach the Jotunheim gate. Now, one thing I want to pinpoint here is the word corruption. Corruption means to alter and transform something against its will or previous existing intention, and this is something that, eerily, sounds very similar to that of the contents of Pandora's box. I mean, from a visual perspective, the two do have very similar appearances, manifesting as a sort of black fog that oozes what only I could describe as evil. The so-called madness of the Titans was a key component in the downfall of Olympus, having come to fruition after their defeat in the Great War. But did this truly come from them, or was this something planted by Odin? Well, whilst I've visually drawn lines of similarity between the two, what else is there beyond that? how does the Black Breath line up with the madness of the Titans? Well, this is where we turn our sights to Alphaim, as well, shortly following their denial to the highest peak of Midgard's mountain, Kratos and Atreus are guided by Freya to the realm of Alphaim. Here, they are told to take the light of Alphaim in order to purge the Black Breath. And if we look at the light of Alphaim and how it does actually function, it is very, very similar to the power of hope. Whilst they manifest in different ways, they do take on the same visual form. A pillar of blinding white light that soars into the sky. Along with this, both have the properties to seemingly erase or suppress the evil of corruption magic. And upon making contact with it, it has a way of dragging you through memories of your past. And finally, the biggest similarity between the two is that both are used in order to bring life to a dying world. In the case of the Olympian pantheon, Athena wished to have used the power of hope to usher in a new world for Greece, with her being its new ruler and overseer. In the case of the Nordic games, I believe that the light of Alfheim was used during the end of the Elf War to breathe life into an otherwise dying world. So, by Kratos taking it, we have him not only reignite the flames of a war, but also, if my theory is correct, Kratos has once again claimed the power of hope without knowing what he has truly done. Whilst we haven't seen the extent of what exactly the Black Breath does to a single individual, we have seen what corruption magic does to an individual. They radiate a form of black mist from their mouth and body upon their demise. And I believe we see this in the Norse series of games, but it's a very, very subtle detail. After defeating the Valkyries, once you tear off their wings, a pool of black mist forms around their corpse, releasing their astral forms from their corrupted bodies. I do believe that the devil's in the detail here of how the Black Breath works and how the madness of the Titans is tied to it. Plus, we must keep in mind, this is our first physical bit of evidence that actually shows Odin's use of corruption magic and just how effective it is, as it even strayed the mighty Valkyries from their quest. So with these similarities drawn, we should then ask the question of how Odin would do this, and how would he know of a world beyond his own? As, well, Odin remained in the world of Midgard, so how would he know of the Olympian pantheon? And why would he interfere? Well, we will touch on that in the conclusion section, but in short, I believe Odin learned of the realms beyond his own through his son, Tyr. Asgard's god of war was infamous for traveling from land to land and uniting them all under his banner of peace. And we know for a fact that he has traveled to the land of Greece, as he was able to bring back a souvenir from his travels, a vase depicting Kratos' time as a servant of Ares. Now, here are where things get a bit tricky. Whilst this vase depicts events that happened before the first game, possibly just before Ascension, this means that Odin would have not only had to have been aware of the Olympian gods, but also the Titans. What makes this part kind of hard to pinpoint is just how far back does Tyr's travels go, as for the most part, what we know of the God of War universe is that whilst the gods all kind of live on the same plane of reality, they don't mess with each other, and for the most part, do try to keep themselves to themselves. This idea and concept was brought to the forefront by 2018's director, Cory Barlog. But the thing is, with this idea and approach to storytelling, it's very open-ended and vague, but I actually think this works in the favor of its story, as it leaves a lot up to interpretation. What allows this theory to work is that we must keep in mind, with the Norse series of games, as well as the realms themselves, they actually all operate on their own different time. So 12 hours in Helheim may in fact be just 1 hour in the realm of Midgard. And I believe a similar system is at play here with the world of the Nordic gods, and how Odin has seen the Greek pantheon. Having become aware of his potential competition, I believe Odin played his hand very early on in Zeus's war against the Titans, so that both would destroy each other. Let's be a little self-aware about this series as a whole, and how I believe this actually helps tie a knot in a long existing plot thread throughout the series. Now, one thing we must be aware of about the 2018 game is that whilst it is a sequel, in spirit, it is just as much of a reboot. They take these concepts and elements from the previous established trilogy, they package it in a new interesting way, whilst retaining its core ideas and image. A perfect example of this is Atreus. Whilst on the surface he's a young, soft-spoken, fragile boy, Loki is a child of fate, one said to bring on the end of Asgard and avenge his people. And whilst this doesn't strictly line up with Kratos, it can be seen as a successor to the idea of the marked child prophecy. Again, much like the Valkyries, whilst very subtle, the idea and concept is clearly there. There has to be a reason for why someone as young as Atreus would bear scars on his face. And although it hasn't been explored, this is without a doubt a callback. If we're looking for clear symbolism, that is a callback. Look at where the black breath comes from. It's a poisonous black mist that pours out of the mouth of the mountain. That is so unbelievably on the nose. Totally not a callback to God of War 3, where Kratos absolutely beats the paste out of Zeus. So, as you can see, I am connecting the dots here. Another thing that we must take into account is that not only do I think Odin's poisoning of the gods helps tie him to the Olympian pantheon, but I actually think it helps paint them in more of a tragic light, brought down by a plague that wasn't born from their victory, but instead the delusions of a madman. One thing we do have to point out is one of the issues with the original trilogy, as well, the first God of War game was originally envisioned to be a one and done sort of deal, which is why its ending feels so definitive. But of course,
these days, you gotta have a sequel!
And after its positive reception, PlayStation naturally wanted one, which kind of raised the question of who's gonna be the big bad, as we already killed Ares. It was only natural that the next big bad was going to be Zeus, someone who actually helps you in that game. So the ideas kind of conflict with each other, but it was also the next natural step in Kratos' story. But with them having to paint the Olympian pantheon in more of a villainous way, they needed to do it in a way that allowed you to overlook the events of the first game, while still keeping in mind what had happened. And this is where the madness of the Titans comes into play. And whilst it is a great plot device, it was kind of pulled out of the sack very last minute, because in many ways, it kind of contradicts some of the horrific acts Zeus did to Deimos, because at the time, he wasn't poisoned by corruption magic. It's one of the slight writing issues of the original trilogy, but it's something that many are aware of. And I think by somewhat softly retconning this twist at the end of the original trilogy, you are not only able to help reinforce the idea of Odin's mischief, but also add a tragic layer to the Greek gods, and how he was responsible for their downfall. How he helped you help him kill Zeus. So, in conclusion, do I think it's at all possible that Odin poisoned the Greek gods? Absolutely. In my mind, the All-Father is a methodical bastard of an elder god, and thus instead of sullying his own hand, he would rather have his poison and corruption tear apart the pantheon from within. If we look at God of War 3, we even find notes from Poseidon teasing at the idea of him usurping Zeus. And with Tyr's exploration of worlds beyond his own, it would be to no surprise that Odin, out of fear of what this pantheon may present, would attempt to kill them off so soon. And if this were to tie into the prophecy of Ragnarok, then we know that whilst the All-Father is aware of it, Odin doesn't actually know the finer details. I believe that Odin, much like Zeus, must have learnt of a warrior from a faraway land that may be an omen of his downfall and demise. Thus, in an effort to once again avert Ragnarok, and have it so his hands would be the ones that guide fate, he would poison the lands of Greece in the hopes of killing off this marked warrior. There is a multitude of different ideas and reasons as to why Odin would do this, but the prime character that makes sense to me when talking about Odin is fear. We learn from the 2018 installment that Odin does indeed fear Kratos, and what he brings to the Norse pantheon. And the reason as to why I think he fears Kratos isn't just because he killed his son, but I believe this is a clear sign that Odin knows who Kratos is. He knows that Kratos was responsible for killing the entire Olympus pantheon. So I think the Allfather was relieved to learn of Greece's destruction. That is, up until he saw the Ashen Warrior in the world of Midgard. So with all these ideas on the table, I think I've managed to put together a pretty compelling idea for how I personally believe that Odin could have played a hand in the downfall of Olympus. It 100% does line up with his character and what to expect from him as a villain in this series. Along with this, it helps add a little more to the universe, and does so in a way where it kind of ties both pantheons together. We still somewhat retain what we have, but just add a few more layers to it. But once again guys, please do keep in mind, this is 100% a theory on my end. This by no means is solid in stone. I'm simply taking bits of a jigsaw puzzle and arranging them in such a way that it paints an image from my perspective. But in saying that, I hope you're able to walk away from this video with a pretty interesting idea of what we may learn of in God of War Ragnarok. So, with that said, what are your own theories about the topic? Do you think it's possible what I've said here? Please do comment down below. Also, if you have some theories yourself, please post them down in the comments below. If I find any interesting ones, I may decide to explore them in a video. But until then, this has been it for me. So now, as always everyone, stay strong, stay well, and keep on fighting as Ragnarok comes for us all. Take care everyone.